The night Lyra Ashwood left the palace, she did not cry. She had promised herself that much. For 3 years she had cried in silence, in locked rooms, in the middle of long nights when no one came looking for her. She had cried enough tears for a lifetime. On the night she finally walked away, her eyes stayed dry, and her hands stayed steady. She folded her wedding cloak with care and laid it on the bed. She placed her crown on the pillow, where it caught a small piece of moonlight through the tall window. Then she pulled on a plain traveling dress, wrapped a gray shawl around her shoulders, and walked out through the servants' gate before the sun rose. No guards stopped her. No one recognized the queen in a woman who walked like she belonged to no one. Lyra had been married to King Draven Cade for one reason only. Their marriage had ended a war between two powerful pacts, sealed an old blood feud, and brought peace to lands that had known nothing but fighting for a generation. She had known, from the very first day, that love had nothing to do with it. Draven was the kind of king that other kingdoms feared, without ever needing to be told why. He was strong, silent, and unshaken by anything. Even his own advisors chose their words carefully around him. He ruled with a calm, iron discipline, and he expected the same discipline from himself in every part of his life, including his marriage. He gave Lyra everything a queen was supposed to have: fine silk gowns, a large chamber with a view of the eastern hills, her own personal guards, jewelry that had belonged to queens before her. He never raised his voice at her. He never once treated her unkindly. He also never truly looked at her. In 3 years, Draven rarely asked how her day had been. He never asked what she thought about the laws he passed, or the treaties he signed, or the way the harvest festival was run. He sat across from her at long formal dinners and spoke of politics, wars, and pack matters, and when she offered her own opinion, he would nod politely and change the subject. She was his wife on paper, his queen in title, but in his eyes, she often felt like a piece of furniture, beautiful, useful, silent. At first, Lyra told herself it would get better with time. She told herself that a man like Draven, who carried the weight of an entire kingdom on his shoulders, simply needed time to open up. She waited. She smiled at court events. She learned the names of every servant in the palace, the way no one had ever bothered to learn hers as a person, rather than a queen. She tried to build a life inside walls that never seemed to let her in. But 3 years passed, and nothing changed. If anything, the distance between them grew wider. Draven began spending more nights in his study, buried in reports and battle plans. Some weeks, they barely spoke more than a few words. Lyra began to feel like a ghost haunting her own home, seen by everyone, but truly known by no one, least of all the man she had married. The final night came without warning, at least not to anyone watching from the outside. Draven had missed their anniversary dinner for the 3rd year in a row, called away by an emergency council meeting that Lyra later learned could easily have waited until morning. She sat alone at the long table, the candles slowly burning down, the food growing cold, and something inside her quietly settled into place. She was not angry. She was simply done. That night she packed a small bag with only what she truly needed. She left behind every piece of jewelry that marked her as a queen. She left a short note on her writing desk, folded neatly, addressed to no one in particular. It did not explain everything. It only said that she needed to find a life where she was seen. By the time the sun rose over the palace towers, Lyra Ashwood was already miles away, walking a quiet forest road toward a future she could not yet picture. It took Draven 2 full days to notice she was gone. He had assumed, at first, that she was resting in her chambers, avoiding him after the missed dinner, as she sometimes did when she was upset. It was only when a servant mentioned that the queen had not eaten in 2 days that alarm finally cut through his usual calm. He found her note on the writing desk. He read it 3 times before the words settled fully into his mind. Something inside him, something he had never given a name to, cracked quietly in that moment. He did not shout. He did not break anything, though every guard in the hallway braced for it. He simply sat in silence for a long while, staring at her handwriting, and then he stood and began giving orders. Search parties went out that same night. Draven sent his most trusted commanders to comb every road leading away from the capital. He questioned every guard who had been on duty. He questioned every servant. No one had seen her leave. She had vanished as quietly as smoke. Weeks turned into months. Draven expanded the search beyond his own kingdom, sending trusted messengers into neighboring territories, offering generous rewards for any information about a woman matching her description. He personally rode out on several occasions, despite his advisor's warnings that a king should not risk himself chasing rumors. The council began to grow uneasy. Several kingdoms offered new political marriages, hoping to strengthen old alliances now that the queen appeared to have abandoned her post. Draven refused every single offer without discussion. His closest advisor, an older wolf named Corwin, who had known him since childhood, finally asked him directly why he cared so much about a marriage that had clearly meant so little to her. Draven did not have a good answer. He only said that he intended to find her, and that the matter was closed. What Draven did not understand, not for a long time, was that Lyra had not left because she hated him. She had left because she loved him, and loving him quietly, invisibly, for 3 years, had slowly worn away at something essential inside her. She had not run from cruelty. She had run from being unseen. While Draven searched kingdom after kingdom, Lyra built a small, quiet life for herself in a border village far from any palace. She took a new name, Mira, and used old root magic passed down through her mother's line to mask her natural scent, so that no shifter tracking party could easily catch her trail. She rented a small cottage at the edge of the village and began working as a healer, using skills she had quietly studied during her years in the palace library, back when she had needed something, anything, to fill the long, empty hours. The villagers came to depend on her within the first year. She treated fevers, set broken bones, delivered babies in the middle of stormy nights, and sat beside the dying when there was nothing left to do but offer comfort. For the first time in longer than she could remember, people needed her, not because of a title stitched onto her name, but because of her own 2 hands and her own steady heart. She told herself she was healed. Most days, she almost believed it. But some nights, when the village was quiet and her small cottage grew still, she would sit by the window and think of him. Not the distant king who forgot anniversaries, but the man underneath, the one she had occasionally glimpsed in quiet, unguarded moments, the way he sometimes looked out over the hills at dawn with something like exhaustion in his eyes, the way his voice softened, just slightly, when he spoke to frightened children during festival visits. She had seen enough of him to know there was someone worth loving buried beneath the crown. She had simply never been given the chance to reach him. 5 years passed this way. Draven never stopped searching, even as his advisors quietly gave up hope and stopped mentioning it in council meetings. He kept her old traveling cloak folded in his chambers, though he told no one why. On the anniversary of her disappearance each year, he canceled all appointments and rode out alone, searching roads that had already been searched 100 times before. Then, in the 6th year, fate intervened in a way neither of them could have arranged. Draven was traveling near the northern border, meeting with a minor allied pack, when his group was ambushed on the road home. It was a small, poorly organized attack, likely the work of scattered rebels rather than any true threat. But Draven took a deep wound to his side during the fighting, and by the time his guards managed to drive off the attackers, he had lost a dangerous amount of blood. His men, desperate and far from any city healer, carried him to the nearest village, the very same border village where Lyra had spent the last 6 years rebuilding her life. She was called to treat him before anyone realized who he was. She knelt beside his unconscious body, focused entirely on the wound, her hands moving with practiced speed to stop the bleeding. It was only when she leaned close to check his breathing that she recognized his face, pale and drawn with pain, but unmistakably his. Her hands trembled for the first time in years. Then she steadied them, because he needed a healer more than he needed anything else in that moment, and she would not let old feelings cost him his life. Draven woke 2 days later in a small, unfamiliar room, weak but alive. The first thing he saw, when his eyes finally focused, was Lyra sitting beside his bed, watching him with an expression he could not quite read. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. He almost thought he was dreaming, some fevered vision brought on by blood loss and exhaustion. But she reached out and touched his hand, checking his pulse the way any healer would, and the touch was real. He tried to speak her name, but his voice came out rough and broken. She quietly told him not to strain himself, and gave him water, and for a while, that was all that happened between them. She tended his wound with the same careful hands she used on every patient in the village, refusing to let old hurt interfere with her duty. It took several more days before Draven was strong enough to truly talk. When he finally asked her why she had left, she did not soften the truth for him. She told him everything she had carried silently for 3 long years. She told him what it felt like to sit across from him at dinner and feel like a stranger. She told him how many nights she had cried alone, in a palace full of people who called her queen, but never once asked how she was truly feeling. Draven listened. He did not defend himself, did not offer excuses about the pressures of ruling a kingdom, though those pressures had certainly been real. He simply listened, fully, for what felt like the first time in his life. When she finished, he told her, quietly, that he had spent 6 years searching every road and every kingdom, not because tradition demanded it, but because somewhere in the middle of his careful, controlled life, he had fallen in love with her without ever telling her so. He said he had been too afraid of appearing weak to show it, and that fear had cost him the very thing he valued most. Lyra did not answer right away. She needed time, and this time, Draven gave it to her without pushing. He stayed in the village for several weeks as he recovered, insisting on doing his own share of physical work, despite his fading injury, chopping wood, repairing fences, carrying water for elderly villagers who had no idea their helper was a king. He let Mira's neighbors see him as an ordinary man, not a ruler, and slowly, day by day, Lyra began to see the version of him she had always suspected was hiding somewhere underneath the crown. When he finally asked her to return with him, he did not ask her to become the silent queen she had once been. He told her, in front of his own council once they returned, that their marriage would change. Lyra would have an equal voice in matters of the kingdom. Her opinions would be heard, not simply tolerated. He restructured old traditions that had kept queens silent for generations, facing real resistance from some corners of his court, and he did not back down. Lyra returned to the palace on her own terms. She wore no crown that first day, only a simple healer's cloak, a quiet reminder to herself and to him of the life she had built and refused to lose entirely. Standing once again in the halls she had once walked out of without a single tear, she finally allowed herself to cry, not from sorrow this time, but from something closer to relief. Beside her, Draven took her hand, and for the first time in their marriage, he did not let go.